They put the cuffs on him before the boarding door even opened. Metal clicked. Cold. Final. The sound snapped through the jet bridge like a gunshot, sharp enough that every conversation nearby died at once. A woman gasped. Someone dropped a phone. The moving walkway kept humming indifferent. Franklin Moore did not resist. He stood there, hands calmly at his sides, dark jacket still buttoned, carry-on upright by his shoe, as if he were waiting for a valet instead of airport police. His breathing stayed even. Slow in. Slow out. The kind of breath a man learns after decades of swallowing anger without letting it show. The officer tightened the grip anyway. "Sir, you're being detained for refusing to comply with airline staff." Refusing. The word landed heavy. Franklin looked past the officer, past the blinking gate sign that still read, boarding past the faces already turning away, because Americans of a certain age knew the rule. Don't stare. Don't get involved. Get home. A man in a windbreaker muttered, "Jesus Christ," under his breath. His wife pulled him back by the sleeve. Franklin's eyes didn't chase them. His gaze stayed fixed on the woman who had started this. Linda Parker stood by the podium, 50-something stiff blonde hair sprayed into place like armor. Her mouth was tight. Her radio crackled against her hip, a sound like static guilt. She didn't look triumphant. She looked cornered. That was worse. "He told you to step aside," Linda said, too loudly, as if volume could rewrite truth. "You refused." Franklin finally spoke. His voice was low, steady, almost gentle. "I asked you to scan the ticket again." "That's not what this is about," she snapped. "You're delaying boarding." Behind her, the gate screen flickered. Final call. Final always meant hurry. Hurry made people cruel. The officer glanced at Franklin's phone, still glowing in his hand, boarding pass open. "First class. Seat 2 Alpha, clear as day." He hesitated. Just a half beat. Long enough for doubt to try and climb in. Then Linda leaned in. "He's not on my manifest." That was the lie. Or the shortcut. In America, the difference often depended on who was listening. The cuffs clicked again as the officer adjusted them. Procedural now, eyes already moving away. "We'll sort it out over there, sir." Over there meant out of sight. Franklin stepped forward when guided his bag rolling once before tipping gently onto its side. No one picked it up. No one offered. The jet bridge door closed with a soft hydraulic sigh, sealing in the cool air and the smell of coffee and jet fuel and impatience. From the inside of the aircraft, a few passengers pressed their faces to the narrow windows, eyes wide. Curious, hungry for a story they would later tell with disclaimers. I don't know the whole thing, but Franklin caught one face in particular. A teenage girl, earbuds, dangling phone, already raised recording without thinking. Her mother noticed too late, hissed her name, pulled the phone down. Franklin gave the girl a small nod anyway. Not fear, not anger. Acknowledgement. The officer paused at the top of the stairs that led back into the terminal. "Sir, just so you know if this is a mistake." "It is," Franklin said. The officer swallowed. He nodded once, like a man filing something away for later. They walked. Inside the terminal, the noise rushed back in. Rolling suitcases, overhead announcements, a piano playing somewhere because airports liked to pretend they were calmer than they were, the smell of pretzels and disinfectant. America in transit. Franklin felt eyes on his back, some judging, some uneasy, some relieved it wasn't them. He was 58 years old. He had been mistaken for staff at his own board meetings. He had been asked if he was lost in buildings he had paid to renovate. He had learned early that outrage only fed the story other people wanted to tell about him. So he kept his face still. Inside, something else was happening. His phone buzzed again. He didn't look. He already knew who it was. He had left the lounge 15 minutes earlier with a warning on his screen and a promise on his lips. "I'll be airborne in 20. Hold the line until I land." That promise was now broken. They stopped near a glass wall overlooking the tarmac. Planes crawled like steel insects. A narrow bodyjet pushed back engines, whining higher. Another plane paused, then rolled again. Everything moved because it had to. Schedules ruled lives here. The officer finally removed the cuffs. "Temporary detainment, sir. Just until we verify." Franklin flexed his wrists once. Red marks bloomed and faded. He looked at them, then at the planes. "May I make a call?" he asked. The officer hesitated, then nodded. "Keep it brief." Franklin stepped aside, lifted the phone, and switched to the secure line with a practiced thumbprint. The world seemed to narrow around that small rectangle of glass. It rang once, then twice. Then the voice came through tight, controlled, threaded with urgency. "We just lost visibility on the secondary node." Franklin closed his eyes for half a second. How long, he asked. Unknown. Could be a test. Could be a dry run. Dry runs were how disasters introduced themselves. He pictured the network map in his mind lines, branching from hub to hub, aircraft to ground, ground to cloud. 173 planes tied into the same nervous system, built to anticipate failure, built to prevent surprise, built by men and women who believed preparation was a moral act. And now something was knocking. "Are we certain it's not a false positive?" Franklin asked. The pause on the other end told him everything. "We're past that." The officer shifted his weight, watching Franklin, without really watching him. Linda Parker stood across the terminal, now arguing with a supervisor, her hands slicing the air. She glanced over, once eyes flicking away when they met his. Franklin lowered his voice. "Initiate containment phase 1. No escalation without my confirmation." "Understood." He ended the call. For the first time since the cuffs, his pulse climbed. Not from anger, from the weight of timing. He looked back through the glass at the plane he was supposed to be on. Boarding door sealed. Tug disconnected. Pushback imminent. A normal departure. 1,000 normal departures happened every day, until one didn't. The supervisor approached, breathless, apologetic, already forming on her face. "Mr. Moore, I understand there's been a misunderstanding." Franklin turned to her, slowly. "There was no misunderstanding," he said. "There was a choice." She froze. The officer looked between them. Franklin's phone buzzed again. Short. Insistent. The second node just went dark. He felt it then. The narrowing, the moment where options collapse into action. Franklin Moore had spent his life being underestimated. He had also spent it preparing for moments when hesitation cost more than courage. Outside, an engine spooled up the sound, deep and rising, a promise of motion. Franklin looked at the supervisor, at the officer, at the glass, at the sky beyond. "Not yet," he said softly. The supervisor's smile arrived too late. It was the kind of smile people learned in training videos. Soft edges, calm tone. The promise that everything would be fine if everyone just lowered their voice and followed procedure. She stood at a careful distance, palms open, badge swinging gently at her chest as if to signal neutrality. "Mr. Moore," she said, "we're sorting this out. There's no need for." Franklin raised one finger, not in threat, not in command, just enough to pause her sentence mid-air. "I'm aware of the process," he said. "I helped write parts of it." The officer beside him stiffened. The supervisor blinked once. The sound of the terminal rushed back in louder now, as if the building itself had leaned closer to listen. She tried again, slower. "Sir, our records show." "Your records show what your system allows you to see," Franklin said. "And your system is already behind." He turned his phone so neither of them could read the screen. He didn't need to. He felt the message through the glass. A tight vibration. A warning that had crossed from technical to human. Inside the aircraft, the cabin lights dimmed slightly. A pre-departure ritual. Seatbelts fastened. A voice practiced and calm came through the speakers, thanking passengers for choosing the airline, for their patience, for their trust. Trust. Franklin almost smiled. He stepped closer to the glass wall. The jet's nose wheel turned a few degrees. Ground crew gave hand signals. Everything was aligned toward motion, toward momentum that did not ask permission from doubt. Behind him, the supervisor spoke quietly into her radio. "Gate control, hold position. I repeat, hold position." The radio crackled back with irritation. "We're at departure window. We can't hold position." A pause, then reluctantly copy. The engine's pitch dipped. The plane paused. A small thing, barely noticeable to anyone not watching for it. Franklin felt a tremor of something like relief, or maybe just time being bought with effort. He turned back to the supervisor. Her name tag read Karen Whitfield, late 40s, tired eyes behind professional polish, a woman who had learned to keep the peace by absorbing damage quietly and passing it along when necessary. Karen took a breath. "Mr. Moore, I'm being told you're listed as a priority passenger, but there's a discrepancy in—" "There is no discrepancy," Franklin said. "There is an assumption." The word landed between them. Karen's eyes flicked just for a second to Linda Parker across the terminal. Linda was still talking, still defensive. Her hands now clasped tight, as if holding something fragile or precious. Karen exhaled through her nose. "Sir, if you'll come with me to the service desk, no." The word was not loud. It was final. The officer shifted again. Sir Franklin looked at him. Really looked. A man in his 30s, maybe early 40s. A wedding band worn thin. Lines at the eyes that came from long shifts and not enough sleep. A man who had chosen order because chaos paid poorly. "What's your name?" Franklin asked. The officer hesitated. "Martinez. Officer Daniel Martinez." Franklin nodded. Officer Martinez, I'm not refusing to cooperate. I'm refusing to be moved out of sight while a time-sensitive failure unfolds behind that glass. Karen frowned. What failure? Franklin's phone buzzed again. This time he did look. 3 words. Phase 1 compromised. His jaw tightened. The world narrowed further. Karen followed his gaze. More, is there something you need to tell us? Franklin considered her. Considered the cameras overhead. The families shuffling past. The quiet expectation that whatever happened next would be ordinary. He chose carefully. There is a system your airline relies on more than fuel, he said. More than weather. More than pilots. It doesn't wear a uniform and it doesn't announce itself. It runs quietly in the background, making sure your planes land before problems exist. Karen's face shifted. Just a fraction. Recognition flickered, then fear. I'm talking about a system that does not tolerate delay, Franklin said. And I'm talking about a clock that is no longer patient. Karen opened her mouth, closed it, then tried again. Sir, if this is about a technical issue, we have channels. Those channels lead to the same place, Franklin said. Only slower. The plane outside shuddered lightly as ground crew adjusted chocks. The captain's voice returned a shade tighter now, explaining a brief delay due to a minor operational check, thanking everyone for their understanding. Understanding. Another word that carried weight. Karen's radio chirped again. Ops wants to know why we're holding. Karen pressed the button. We have a priority verification in progress. There was a pause on the line. Priority how? Karen glanced at Franklin. He met her eyes without flinching. Top tier, she said. The radio went quiet. Then, all right, keep us posted. Karen lowered the radio. Her hands trembled slightly. She folded them together to hide it. Mr. Moore, she said, if what you're implying is accurate, then the right thing to do is to get you to our operations center immediately. Franklin shook his head once. No time. He lifted his phone. The secure interface glowed softly, unassuming. No alarms, no red banners, just clean text. Choices waiting for confirmation. Officer Martinez leaned closer, curiosity winning over protocol. Sir, what happens if that system fails? Franklin didn't look away from the screen. Worst case. He thought of numbers, of probabilities, of cascading errors. He translated them into something human. People get hurt who did nothing wrong. Karen's throat worked. She nodded once as if that settled something inside her. All right, she said. Tell me what you need. Linda Parker's voice cut across the space. This is ridiculous. We're holding a full flight because of him. Karen turned sharply. Linda, stop. Linda froze. Shock registered on her face. She wasn't used to that tone, to being told no without explanation. Karen continued, voice firm now. Go back to your station. Linda opened her mouth, closed it. The supervisor's authority finally landed. Linda turned away, stiff, humiliated, disappearing into the crowd. Franklin felt no satisfaction, just a narrowing focus. His phone buzzed again. Confirmation request pending. He inhaled slowly, exhaled. Karen stepped closer. Mr. Moore, if you do whatever it is you're about to do, Then planes stop moving, Franklin said. Not falling, not failing, stopping. Safely. Where they are. Karen swallowed. How many Franklin's thumb hovered? 173. Officer Martinez let out a low whistle before he could stop himself. Karen closed her eyes for a brief moment. When she opened them, something had changed. The practiced calm was gone. What remained was resolve. "Do it," she said quietly. "If it's the right thing." Franklin studied her face. He saw the calculation, the career risk, the knowledge that saying yes would leave fingerprints. He nodded once. Respect offered silently. He tapped the screen. Authentication. Identity verified. A second tap. Escalation menu. A third deliberate press. Hold. The system asked him to confirm. Plain language. No drama. Are you certain Franklin thought of the cuffs, of the jet bridge, of the teenage girl lowering her phone, of a system built to catch problems before they became headlines? "I am," he said aloud, though no one had asked. He confirmed. Nothing happened at first. The plane outside remained still. The terminal hummed. Life continued oblivious. Then Karen's radio erupted. Multiple channels, voices overlapping, confusion sharpening into alarm. "Ops to all gates. We're seeing a fleet-wide flag. Repeat, fleet-wide flag." The captain's voice cut through the noise, no longer smooth. "Gate confirm. We just lost green across all panels." The plane's lights flickered. Just once. Franklin lowered his phone. Officer Martinez stared at him, awe and fear warring on his face. "Sir." "What did you just do?" Franklin met his eyes. "I bought us time." The alarm didn't sound like an alarm at first. It was too clean, too precise. A sharp electronic chirp that cut through the terminal's noise and then multiplied, echoing from podium to podium, tablet to tablet, cockpit to cockpit. Screens that had glowed calm blue flipped to red, not flashing, not panicking, just red. Absolute. Final. Karen Whitfield felt it before she understood it. The way the air changed. The way conversations stopped mid-word. The way people who had been walking with purpose suddenly froze as if the floor had tilted without moving. Her radio exploded with voices. Ops shouting over ops. Gate agents calling numbers they didn't yet understand. A dispatcher somewhere swore loudly, then went silent. Officer Martinez stepped closer to Franklin without realizing it. Instinct pulling him toward the calmest thing in the room. "Sir," the officer said low, "what exactly does a fleet-wide flag mean?" Franklin watched the aircraft through the glass. The nose wheel had straightened. The tug disconnected completely. For a heartbeat it looked ready to go anyway. Momentum fighting instruction. Then the brakes engaged. Hard. Inside the cabin, bodies lurched forward against seat belts. A ripple of surprise passed through the rows. A coffee cup flew. Somewhere, a child cried out, startled more than afraid. The captain's voice came over the terminal speakers. This time, not the cabin. Tighter. Older. No script to hide behind. Attention all ground personnel. All movements are suspended. I repeat, all movements are suspended until further notice. Karen exhaled shakily. 173 planes. The number rang in her ears like a tolling bell. Passengers began to notice. A man in a business suit pointed at the stopped plane. "What's going on?" A woman clutched her boarding pass, reading it again as if the letters might rearrange themselves into an explanation. Phones came out. Screens lit up. The first push notifications hit before the questions finished forming. Flight delayed, then cancelled. Then a flood. Franklin's phone buzzed again this time, with confirmation logs stacking neatly line by line. Node isolation complete. External access severed. Internal diagnostics running. He slipped the phone back into his pocket. The hardest part was done. Now came the consequences. Karen turned Torsum to him, her face pale but composed. "You just shut down the airline," Franklin corrected her gently. I paused it. That distinction mattered. He needed it to matter. Across the terminal, Linda Parker stood frozen at her podium, staring at her screen. The red reflection washed over her face, making her look ill. She pressed buttons that didn't respond. Her radio squawked uselessly. She looked around, searching for authority for someone to tell her what to do. No one met her eyes. Officer Martinez spoke into his shoulder mic, voice clipped professional. "Command, we have a system-wide event at Terminal 4. One individual claims responsibility under emergency protocol." There was a long pause on the other end. Then copy, stand by. The terminal's volume rose like a wave. Anger mixed with fear. Fear curdled into accusation. People demanded answers from the nearest uniform, regardless of relevance. Karen raised her voice, directing her team, trying to impose shape on the chaos. Franklin stepped back out of the immediate crush. He didn't need to see the rest to know how it would unfold. He had sat in enough war rooms. He had watched systems break and be rebuilt. This was the messy middle where truth lagged behind reaction. His phone rang. Not the secure line this time. The caller ID showed a name he hadn't expected so soon. Thomas Reynolds. Franklin hesitated, just long enough to listen to the terminal again, to feel the weight of what he had triggered. Then he answered. Franklin Moore. The voice on the other end was hoarse already. Thomas Reynolds, CEO, had spent decades projecting calm under pressure. It was gone now. Franklin. What the hell is happening? My entire operations board just lit up red. We've got planes frozen mid-taxi. Controllers screaming. This came from your system. Franklin closed his eyes briefly. He pictured Thomas as he knew him. Mid-60s. Silver hair. The posture of a man used to rooms falling quiet when he entered. A man who believed in layers of insulation between himself and consequence. Thomas Franklin said, "Keep your voice down. This line is not secure." There was a sharp breath. Then silence. Then quieter, strained words. Explain. Now. Franklin leaned against the glass. Outside ground crews ran confused, their gestures frantic but contained. No planes moved. The sky above was suddenly empty of motion. Your airline uses an integrated safety and predictive maintenance system developed by my company, Franklin said. You know this. Yes, Thomas snapped. And it's never done this, because it's never had to, Franklin said. We identified an active intrusion attempt, not theoretical, not a drill. Live access testing your redundancies. Thomas was silent, processing, denial wrestling with comprehension. We were minutes away from losing control of core diagnostics. Franklin continued. The only way to contain it was to sever external access entirely. That triggers an automatic safety hold across all dependent aircraft. 173, Thomas whispered. Yes. My God. Thomas's voice cracked despite himself. Do you know what this is costing us? Franklin opened his eyes. I do. Then why now? Thomas demanded. Why without warning? Franklin turned slightly. Through the glass, he saw Karen fielding an irate passenger. Her hands steady, her voice firm. He saw Officer Martinez holding a small perimeter, eyes scanning alert. He saw Linda Parker being approached by a man in a dark suit. He didn't recognize her shoulders, sagging as he spoke. Because now was the last safe moment, Franklin said. And because I was not in the air where you expected me to be. Thomas frowned audibly. What does that mean? Franklin chose his words with care. He had thought about this conversation for years abstractly. Not this call, but this reckoning. I was detained at your gate this morning, Franklin said. My ticket was challenged, my presence questioned. I was removed from the boarding process long enough for this threat to escalate. There was a pause so deep it swallowed the noise of the terminal. Detained, Thomas repeated. Yes. By whom? Franklin did not answer immediately. He let the silence work. He let Thomas imagine the scene. A black man, handcuffs, a boarding door closing. When he spoke again, his voice was colder. We'll get to that. Right now, you need to understand something. This decision was made because of an active security threat. That is the truth, but the timing was influenced by a failure in your frontline operation that prevented me from responding in person. Thomas exhaled slowly. Franklin, if what you're saying is true, it is, Franklin said. Then we have two problems, Thomas said quietly. One technical, one cultural. Franklin allowed himself a small, grim acknowledgement. Exactly. Thomas's voice hardened. What do you need to... Franklin looked out at the frozen plains again. The sheer scale of it. The trust millions of people placed in invisible systems and fallible humans. I need you to authorize a full independent audit, Franklin said. Technical and operational. Immediate suspension of any staff involved in denying me access this morning pending investigation. And I need your full cooperation to keep this hold in place until my team clears the system. Thomas didn't argue. Not now. He knew a losing position when he heard one. You'll have it, he said. All of it. Just tell me when we can move again. Franklin closed his eyes. He felt the weight settle fully now. The responsibility. The moral gravity. When it's safe, he said. Not a minute before. He ended the call. Karen approached him, then her expression a mix of awe and exhaustion. They're rerouting passengers. The terminal's going to be a mess for hours. Ops wants you upstairs. Franklin nodded. In a moment. He watched Linda Parker one last time as she was led away from her podium, not in cuffs, but in quiet disgrace. Her face was flushed, Her mouth worked soundlessly. The crowd barely noticed. There were bigger fires now. Officer Martinez came to stand beside him again. "Sir, I've been doing this job a long time. I've seen power, but I've never seen anyone stop the sky." Franklin didn't look at him. "I didn't stop it," he said. "I held it accountable." The terminal roared on. Planes sat silent, and somewhere deep inside the system, the clock Franklin trusted began to tick in his favor. The operations center smelled like burnt coffee and fear. Franklin felt it the moment the elevator doors slid open. The hum of servers under the floor, the low murmur of overlapping voices trying to sound calm and failing. Screens lined the walls, every one of them painted the same unforgiving red. No blinking, no countdowns, just status. Grounded. Thomas Reynolds stood at the center of it all, jacket draped over a chair he hadn't sat in. Sleeves rolled to the elbow, as if that might help him wrestle control back from the air itself. He looked older up close, not weaker, just thinner around the eyes. A man who had spent a lifetime trusting systems, suddenly finding out how little they loved him back. Franklin Thomas said when he saw him. He didn't extend a hand. He didn't smile. He nodded. Respect stripped of ceremony. Franklin returned it. He took in the room. The technicians hunched over consoles. The legal counsel whispering urgently near the glass wall. The FAA liaison standing off to the side, arms crossed, face unreadable. This was not panic. This was triage. "Where are we?" Franklin asked. Thomas gestured toward the largest screen. "We isolated the breach vector, or we think we did. Your team says it's contained but not clean." Franklin nodded. "Contained buys time. Clean takes courage." A young engineer turned in her chair, eyes bloodshot, voice hoarse. "Sir." The intrusion didn't come from outside the network the way we expected. Franklin felt the room tilt. "Explain." She swallowed. It came from inside a trusted layer. Credentials that shouldn't have been active were. They weren't stolen. They were dormant. Thomas stiffened. "You're saying this wasn't a random attack?" Franklin didn't answer her. He answered the implication. "I'm saying someone left a door unlocked and forgot about it." The FAA liaison stepped forward. "We need clarity, Mr. Moore. If this suggests internal negligence, or worse, we're obligated to ground the fleet," Franklin said calmly, "which is already done." The liaison held his gaze. "For now." Franklin inclined his head. "For as long as it takes." The engineer continued momentum, carrying her now. The access points trace back to a maintenance contractor that was sunset 2 years ago. Their permissions were never fully revoked. Someone noticed. Someone tested the boundary. Thomas rubbed his face. Jesus. Franklin closed his eyes for a beat. He saw it clearly now. Not malice, at least not initially. Complacency. The quiet rot of unchecked access. The kind of thing that didn't make headlines until it did. Karen Whitfield appeared at the doorway, breathless. "Passenger services are overwhelmed. We've got seniors missing connections, medical exceptions piling up. We need guidance." Franklin turned to her. "Prioritize medical, then families with dependents, then everyone else. Clear communication. No euphemisms. Karen nodded. We'll say the word security. Franklin nodded back. Say safety. She hesitated, then smiled faintly, and left. Thomas watched her go. You're good with people. Franklin didn't look at him. I'm good with responsibility. A lawyer cleared her throat. Franklin, about the personnel issue this morning will be addressed, Franklin said evenly, after we make sure no one dies because of an unlocked door. The lawyer fell silent. The engineer's screen chimed softly. Green began to creep back into one corner. Limited diagnostics restored. We can start validating nodes one hub at a time, she said. But it'll take hours, Franklin nodded. That's acceptable. Thomas stared at the screen, as if willing it to move faster. You know what this is costing us. Franklin met his eyes. I know what it would cost you if we didn't do this. The room held that truth like a held breath. A technician raised his hand, hesitant. Sir, there's something else. Franklin turned. Go on. We pulled historical logs tied to the dormant credentials. There was activity months ago. Minor adjustments, small enough to be dismissed as noise, but consistent. Thomas's voice dropped. How small fuel optimization values, maintenance thresholds, nothing that would trigger alarms, but enough to shift wear patterns over time. Franklin felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Someone hadn't been trying to crash planes. They had been trying to age them. Quietly. Invisibly. That's not a prank, Franklin said. That's a plan. Thomas sank into the chair he had avoided until now. His hands shook when he clasped them together. Who would do this? Franklin thought of incentives, of contracts, of corners cut, of men who believed risk was theoretical until it wasn't. We'll find out, he said, after the fleet is safe. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He didn't need to look to know who it was. The other line. The one that didn't ring unless something had changed. He stepped aside and answered. We found the third access path, came the voice. It was hidden behind a legacy reporting module. Someone kept it alive on purpose. Franklin closed his eyes. Lock it down. Preserve everything. No deletions. Already done. He ended the call and turned back to the room. We're not resuming today, Franklin said. Thomas looked up sharply. Today, Franklin held his gaze. Not until every compromised pathway is sealed and independently verified. The FAA liaison nodded once. That's the correct call. Thomas exhaled. The fight drained out of him. All right. The engineer glanced between them. Sir, there's something else you should know. Franklin raised an eyebrow. The first anomaly was logged at 12:41 in the morning. Franklin froze. That was not just a time. It was a memory. A number tied to a notification he had ignored weeks ago because he had been in a hotel room half asleep, telling himself it could wait until morning. Thomas noticed the change. Franklin's jaw tightened. That was my fault. The room went still. I flagged a low priority alert. Franklin continued. I told my team to schedule a review. I didn't escalate. I trusted the redundancy. Thomas studied him, not with accusation, with something closer to recognition. You're saying this isn't just on us? Franklin nodded. Systems fail when people assume someone else is watching. The engineer swallowed. Sir, are you saying I'm saying accountability doesn't stop at your logo? Franklin said. It includes mine. The FAA liaison watched him carefully now. Most men in your position wouldn't say that. Franklin shrugged. Most men in my position don't get handcuffed at the gate. The words landed heavier than he intended. The room absorbed them. Thomas stood slowly. All right, Franklin. Then we do this right. Together. Franklin met his eyes. Good. Outside the operations center, the terminal groaned under the weight of delay and disappointment. Inside, something else was happening. Not resolution. Not forgiveness. Alignment. Franklin looked at the map of frozen aircraft. 173 points of light waiting for permission to move. He felt the old pressure in his chest, the one that came from knowing the world would judge the outcome, not the intention. He straightened his jacket. Let's get to work. The first plane cleared wasn't the one anyone expected. Franklin watched the board as green returned not across the hub, not across the airline, but to a single regional aircraft parked 2 gates down from the chaos. An aging, narrow-body early-morning medical reroute. 2 patients on board. 1 heart condition. 1 dialysis transfer. Quiet, urgent, unglamorous. Clear that one, Franklin said. The engineer hesitated. So protocol allows exceptions when lives are involved, Franklin said. Verify the patch on its segment. Air gap confirmed. Then let it go. Keys clicked. A light changed. Somewhere out there, a pilot exhaled without knowing why. Thomas Reynolds noticed. You're starting with mercy. Franklin didn't look at him. I'm starting with responsibility. The room leaned forward, as if the decision had physical gravity. People moved faster now. Not panicked. Focused. The kind of speed that came from purpose instead of fear. A tech lead raised a hand. We're getting pressure from media. They're calling it a shutdown. Franklin shook his head once. It's a hold. Words matter. Thomas rubbed his jaw. Stock's already reacting. Franklin met his eyes. It will recover. You sound certain. I am, Franklin said. Fear sells faster than truth, but truth outlasts it. On another screen, internal messages stacked up. Crews asking for guidance. Gate agents asking what to say. One message stood out, flagged by Karen Whitfield. Passenger relations request guidance on a group of veterans stranded overnight. Ages late 60s to early 70s. They're calm but worried about medications. Franklin leaned closer. We're Concourse B. Get them a quiet space. Chairs with arms. Water. Someone who knows how to listen, Franklin said. Not a script. A person. Karen replied almost instantly. On it. Thomas watched this unfold, something like disbelief settling in. You're managing my airline, Franklin corrected him gently. I'm protecting it. A new alert chimed softer than the others. External call priority. Thomas's assistant appeared at the door, pale. Sir Legal from the Union, and HR wants to brief you on the gate incident. Franklin felt the tug then. The other thread. The one he had not followed yet, because the system demanded first place. Thomas nodded to the assistant. In a minute. Franklin exhaled. Not yet. Finish the sweep on the western hub. Then we talk about people. The assistant retreated. An engineer swiveled around. Sir, we've isolated the third path fully. It was masked behind a reporting module that hadn't been audited in 5 years. Franklin closed his eyes briefly. 5 years was a lifetime in code. In people, it was nothing. Who approved its persistence? The engineer glanced at Thomas, then back. A former contractor. Their supervisor signed off on the sunset. The revocation checklist was incomplete. Thomas winced. Names. We have them. Franklin nodded. Preserve everything. No shortcuts. The FAA liaison stepped forward. Mr. Moore, public messaging is about to get ahead of us. They're asking if this was an act of retaliation. Franklin opened his eyes, against whom the liaison held his gaze. That's the question. Franklin thought of the cuffs, the jet bridge, the eyes that looked away. He thought of the patients on the cleared plane, already pushing back. He chose his answer carefully. Say this was a safety intervention triggered by verified risk, Franklin said. Say it was coordinated. Say we did what the system was built to do. And the gate incident. Franklin's voice cooled. Say it's under review. Thomas interjected defensive. It will be under review. Franklin turned to him. It will be addressed with the same rigor we apply to code. Thomas nodded slowly. Understood. The room shifted again. Not in fear. In alignment. Franklin's phone buzzed. Not secure. A personal line he hadn't expected to hear from today. He stepped aside and answered. Dad. The voice was older, gravelly. Concern threaded through restraint. Son, I'm seeing the news. Are you all right? Franklin swallowed. He hadn't planned for this. I'm fine. They're saying planes are grounded. That you're involved. Franklin closed his eyes. He pictured his father at a kitchen table somewhere in Ohio, newspaper folded, coffee cooling, a man who had lived through enough to know how stories bent. I'm at work, Franklin said. Doing what needs doing. A pause. Then I taught you to keep your head down. Franklin smiled faintly. You taught me to keep my hands clean. Another pause. Longer this time. Don't let them make you the villain, his father said. Franklin's voice softened. I'm not letting anyone make me anything. He ended the call before the room could hear the weight of it. Karen reappeared at the doorway, eyes tired but bright. The veterans are settled. One of them asked if you were the man who stopped the planes. Franklin frowned. What did you tell him? Karen smiled. I told him someone did the right thing. Franklin nodded. That would do? A screen flickered. Another aircraft segment cleared. Then another. Not in order of profit, in order of need. Thomas watched the pattern form. You're not clearing by revenue. Franklin shook his head. I'm clearing by risk. A legal advisor finally stepped forward, clutching a tablet like a shield. Mr. Moore, we need to discuss potential exposure. If it comes out that this decision was influenced by stop, Franklin said. The word cut cleanly. This decision was influenced by data. Franklin continued. The fact that I was delayed is relevant to why I wasn't in the operations center sooner. It is not relevant to whether this was necessary. The lawyer hesitated. But perception is not reality, Franklin said. And we don't run aircraft on perception. The lawyer fell back. A murmur rippled through the room. Approval, relief, something like pride, though no one would name it. Thomas leaned closer. Quietly. You didn't have to take responsibility for the missed alert earlier. Franklin's gaze stayed on the board. Yes, I did. Thomas studied him. Why? Because if I don't, someone else will. And they'll get it wrong. Outside the operations center, the terminal's roar softened into a steady, resentful murmur. People adjusted, found seats, made calls. Life bent around the pause. Inside the map continued to change. Green spreading carefully, earned, not rushed. Another message from Karen. Media asking if you'll speak. Franklin shook his head. Not yet. When the last plane is safe. Thomas looked at the board. That could be hours. Franklin nodded. Then we wait. A young tech glanced up, awe plain on his face. Sir, can I ask you something? Franklin turned. Were you scared? Franklin considered the question. He thought of his father, of the cuffs, of the phone buzzing with warnings while the world pretended nothing was wrong. Yes, he said. But fear isn't a reason to stop. It's a reason to be precise. The tech nodded, absorbing it like a lesson he hadn't known he needed. Another aircraft cleared. Then another. Franklin felt the weight ease incrementally. Not relief. Responsibility shared. He straightened, rolled his shoulders once and stayed where he was. Eyes on the sky, he had paused, making sure it deserved to move again. Night settled over the airport, without asking permission. The glass walls of the operations center reflected tired faces back at themselves, doubled and ghosted by exhaustion. Coffee cups multiplied. Jackets came off. Ties loosened. Time stretched, then compressed, then stretched again. Measured now in clearances and verifications instead of minutes. Franklin stood where he had stood for hours, unmoving, except for the slow shift of weight from one foot to the other. The board in front of him was no longer red. It was a careful mosaic of green amber and waiting grey. Progress, but fragile, the kind that punished impatience. A senior engineer approached quietly, as if loud footsteps might jinx the work. So the Eastern Hub just completed secondary verification. No anomalies. Franklin nodded. Release in sequence. 2 aircraft at a time. Staggered. The engineer hesitated. Sir Ops is pushing to accelerate. They're worried about crew timeouts. Franklin didn't raise his voice. If we rush, we make mistakes. If we make mistakes, people get hurt. Crew timeouts can be fixed. The engineer swallowed and nodded. Understood. Thomas Reynolds watched this exchange from his chair, hands folded, eyes rimmed red. He looked less like a chief executive now, and more like a man who had been forced to sit with the consequences of years of deferred decisions. He cleared his throat. Franklin, there's something you should know. Franklin didn't turn. Go on. Thomas chose his words carefully. The contractor whose credentials were left active, they were flagged internally once. A junior analyst raised a concern. It was deprioritized. Franklin finally looked at him. By whom? Thomas's jaw tightened. By someone on my oversight team. Silence settled between them, thick and uncomfortable. Franklin spoke evenly. Names matter. Thomas nodded. I'll give them to you. Franklin turned back to the board. Good. A door opened softly behind them. Karen Whitfield stepped in her hair, slightly out of place now, the polish worn down to something more human. She held a folded piece of paper instead of a tablet. We have a situation, she said. Franklin waited. A group of passengers refused hotel vouchers. They're older. They say they've lived through worse delays, but they want to understand why this happened. Not the PR version. Thomas frowned. We can't. Franklin interrupted gently. Where are they, Concourse B, near the windows? Franklin nodded. I'll go. Thomas stood up sharply. You can't just walk out there. Franklin met his eyes. I can. Karen hesitated. So the press will wait, Franklin said. People shouldn't have to guess when they've done nothing wrong. Thomas studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded once. All right. The walk through the terminal felt different now. Not hostile, not calm. Expectant. Conversations lowered as Franklin passed. Some recognized him. Some didn't. Most sensed gravity without knowing its source. The group sat together near the windows, coats folded on laps, canes resting against knees. Men and women in their late 60s, 70s, faces lined by time, not fear. A few looked up as Franklin approached. Karen stopped a few steps back. Franklin went alone. Evening, he said. A man with a veteran's cap nodded back. Evening. I'm Franklin Moore, Franklin said. I wanted to explain what's happening if you'll allow me. The man studied him, then gestured to an empty chair. Sit. Franklin sat. A woman spoke first. We've been told safety. That's a big word. Franklin nodded. It is. It can hide things if you let it. The man with the cap leaned forward. Son, are we in danger? Franklin didn't dodge it. No, because we stopped before there was danger. They watched him closely now. There was an attempt to access a system that helps keep planes safe, Franklin said. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. Those are the dangerous ones. We caught it early, but the only way to be sure was to pause everything. A woman frowned. And you did that? Franklin nodded. Yes. Another man snorted softly. Must have taken some nerve. Franklin considered that. It took responsibility. The veteran chuckled once. That's usually what nerve is. They sat with that. Outside, a plane taxied slowly, then stopped again, waiting its turn. The woman who had spoken first sighed. We'll miss a night with our grandkids. Franklin met her eyes. I'm sorry. She studied his face. You mean that? Franklin nodded. I do. The veteran stood slowly, joints protesting. He extended a hand. I flew maintenance back in the day. People forget that safety is quiet until it isn't. Franklin stood and took his hand. Thank you. When Franklin returned to the operations center, something had shifted again. Not urgency. Resolve. Thomas looked up as he entered. "You didn't have to do that." Franklin shrugged. "I did." A junior analyst approached, eyes wide. "Sir, social media is turning. People are sharing stories of you talking to passengers." Franklin frowned. "I didn't talk to them for that." Thomas smiled faintly for the first time all night. "That's why it matters." An alert chimed. Western Hub cleared fully. Franklin nodded. "Begin phased restart. Keep monitoring." The FAA liaison stepped closer. "Mr. Moore, preliminary reports suggest you prevented a long-term degradation scenario. This could have ended very differently." Franklin exhaled. Quietly. Thomas rubbed his temples. "I owe you more than I can say." Franklin looked at him. "You owe your passengers a system that doesn't depend on luck." Thomas nodded. "We'll build it." Hours later, the last grey square turned green. The board was whole again. Franklin felt the tension drain from his shoulders, slowly like a tide receding. He checked his phone. Messages stacked up now. Praise, accusation, questions. None of them urgent anymore. Karen leaned against the wall, exhausted. "Planes are moving, hotels rebooking. It's calming down." Franklin nodded. "Thank you." She hesitated. "Sir, about this morning." Franklin looked at her. "Yes." She swallowed. "I should have stepped in sooner." Franklin considered her, then nodded once. "Next time, do." She smiled, relieved, and walked away. Thomas approached holding 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to Franklin. Cold by now. Franklin took it anyway. "What happens next?" Thomas asked. Franklin looked out at the tarmac planes, lifting one by one into the night sky. The world resuming, unaware of how close it had come to something else. Next, Franklin said, "We talk about why a system built to protect people needed a man in handcuffs to save it." Thomas stared into his cup. "That's going to be uncomfortable." Franklin met his eyes. "Good." Outside, a plane roared into the dark engines, strong, steady, accountable. Franklin watched it disappear and allowed himself for the first time since morning to breathe. Morning came without apology. Sunlight pushed through the glass walls of the operations center, pale and relentless, exposing everything the night had tried to soften. Empty cups, crumpled notes, faces that had aged years in hours. Franklin stood at the same window he had watched through the night. The sky now awashed blue planes, lifting again in steady rhythm. The system breathed. That was good. What came next would not be easy. Thomas Reynolds joined him, jacket back on hair smoothed as if appearance could restore order. "We've stabilized operations across all hubs. Crews are rotating. Passengers are moving. We're issuing refunds and rebooking fees without resistance." Franklin nodded. "That's the surface." Thomas didn't argue. He followed Franklin's gaze to the tarmac. Beneath that, Thomas said, "Legal is preparing statements. The board wants a timeline." Franklin turned. "Then we start with the truth." They moved into a smaller conference room. Glass walls frosted just enough to blur the activity outside. A long table, too many chairs, a screen at the far end already alive with names and timestamps. Karen Whitfield stood near the door posture, straight eyes tired but alert. Officer Martinez leaned against the wall, arms crossed, a quiet witness where he probably didn't belong and knew it. Franklin took the head of the table without ceremony. "Thank you for being here," he said. "We're not here to assign blame yet. We're here to establish facts." A lawyer cleared her throat. "Mr. Moore, for the record." Franklin raised a hand. "For the record, this meeting is about safety and conduct, not liability. If that's a problem, you're free to step out." No one moved. Franklin nodded once. "Good." He tapped the screen. A timeline appeared clean and unforgiving. 12:41 in the morning, initial anomaly, logged, deferred. He let it sit there. "This was my miss," Franklin said. "I didn't escalate a low priority alert. I own that." Thomas inhaled sharply, but Franklin continued before he could speak. That miss mattered. But it didn't cause yesterday. What happened yesterday required something else. Complacency layered on top of assumption. He advanced the timeline. The dormant credentials, the incomplete revocation, the contractor sunsetted without verification, a chain of small decisions that no one felt because no one felt responsible. Karen spoke quietly. This would have kept going. Franklin nodded. "Yes." He advanced again. Gate D18. Time stamps. Names. Linda Parker's name appeared. Karen shifted her weight. Franklin saw it. The human reaction to a name turning into a data point. At 7:12 in the morning, Franklin said my boarding pass was challenged. Not because of a system error, because of an assumption. When I asked for verification, I was removed from the process. Officer Martinez spoke for the first time. He didn't look at Franklin. He looked at the table. Procedure was cited, but it was selective. I should have asked more questions. Franklin met his eyes. "Thank you for saying that." Thomas leaned forward. "Franklin, I've already authorized an internal review of the gate incident." Franklin nodded. "That's not enough." The room tightened. "This isn't about punishment," Franklin said. "It's about patterns. When frontline staff feel empowered to decide who belongs based on appearance, that's not a training issue. That's a systems issue." A manager bristled. With respect, Sir Franklin cut him off, not sharply but completely. Respect starts with listening. Silence returned. Karen stepped forward. "Linda Parker is suspended pending investigation. Her access has been revoked." Franklin nodded. "And the review," Karen held his gaze. "Independent, external oversight, no shortcuts." Franklin exhaled. "Good." He advanced the timeline again. "Onboard conduct. Delays. The water incident, the failure to render assistance. Not dramatic, not criminal. Worse. Casual." Thomas rubbed his temples. "Ethan Brooks has been placed on administrative leave." Franklin looked at him. "Pending what?" "Pending truth," Franklin said. "Not convenience." Thomas nodded. "Pending truth." The lawyer tried again. "Mr. Moore, public perception." Franklin turned to her. The public will survive the truth. It's institutions that don't. He stood then, slow, deliberate. The room rose with him without realizing it. We paused 173 planes to protect people who would never know our names, Franklin said. That's the job. But the reason it had to be done when it was done has everything to do with who is allowed to interrupt a system. Officer Martinez shifted. Sir, are you saying I'm saying systems fail when they treat dignity as optional? Franklin said. When people learn that questioning authority is a risk, not a responsibility. Karen nodded once, fierce. That's true. Thomas looked at her, then back at Franklin. What do you want? Franklin considered the question. This was the moment where anger could masquerade as clarity. He refused it. I want a structural audit of access, Franklin said. Not just technical, cultural, decision rights. Escalation paths. I want to know who gets believed and why. Thomas swallowed. That's going to be painful. Franklin met his eyes. Pain is cheaper than disaster. The room absorbed that. A junior manager spoke, hesitant. Sir, there's concern this will be seen as overreach. Franklin nodded. It will be seen that way by people who benefit from the status quo. Thomas straightened. Then we'll take the hit. Franklin turned back to the screen and brought up a final panel. A map of roles, gate agents, flight crew, maintenance, ops, leadership, all connected by lines that showed where decisions flowed and where they stopped. We redesign this, Franklin said. Together, clear authority, clear accountability, clear humanity. Karen let out a breath she'd been holding. I'll start with training. Franklin nodded. Training matters. But training without consequence is theater. The lawyer scribbled notes, now resigned. Thomas stood. I'll take this to the board. Today. Franklin met his gaze. I'll be there. Thomas paused. You don't work for us. Franklin's expression didn't change. I work for the people who trust the sky. That landed. Outside the conference room, reporters gathered, cameras ready, hunger visible. Karen glanced toward them. They're waiting for a statement. Franklin shook his head. Not yet, when the people who were harmed understand what happened before the people who profit from it, Franklin said. Karen nodded. Officer Martinez cleared his throat. Sir, I wanted to say yesterday could have gone differently. You didn't make it worse. Franklin looked at him. That was the goal. The officer hesitated. For what it's worth, my mother's flying out of Phoenix today. She's 72. Franklin allowed himself a small smile. Then I'm glad we were careful. As the meeting broke, Franklin returned to the window. The airport was waking fully now. Coffee lines, rolling bags, announcements that sounded normal again. He felt the familiar pull of fatigue, the kind that came after doing the right thing, when it would have been easier not to. His phone buzzed, a message from his father. 2 words. Proud. Son. Franklin closed his eyes for a second, then opened them. There would be statements, lawsuits, editorials. None of that mattered as much as the next choice. Behind him, Thomas spoke quietly to the room. Let's begin. Franklin stayed at the window, watching a plane lift cleanly into the morning, knowing the hardest part was not stopping the sky, but teaching it how to be fair when it moved again. The boardroom smelled like polish and restraint. Franklin felt it as soon as the doors closed behind him. Mahogany table, perfectly aligned chairs, bottled water untouched. A wall of glass looking out over the city as if height alone conferred clarity. Men and women in tailored suits sat with hands folded, eyes alert, measuring him not as a savior or a villain, but as a variable. Thomas Reynolds took his seat beside Franklin, posture formal now, CEO again. Around them the board waited. The chairwoman spoke first. Calm, experienced. "We appreciate you coming in person, Mr. Moore. Yesterday was extraordinary." Franklin inclined his head. Extraordinary usually means unprepared. A few expressions tightened. The chairwoman continued. "The fleet is operational. The breach is contained. We are grateful." "Gratitude without accountability is noise," Franklin said evenly. Silence followed. Not offended, evaluative. A man at the far end cleared his throat. "Are you suggesting the grounding was caused by more than a technical failure?" Franklin met his gaze. "I'm suggesting the timing was." Another board member leaned forward. "Are you implying retaliation?" Franklin didn't blink. "I'm stating causation." Thomas shifted, ready to intervene, but Franklin raised a hand slightly. "Yesterday's hold was triggered by verified risk," Franklin said. That decision was correct. "The reason it had to be made when it was made is what we're here to discuss." He tapped the tablet in front of him. The room's main screen lit up not with charts, but with a single image. A still frame from a security camera. Gate D18. A man in a dark jacket. Hands calm. Cuffs mid-click. Several board members inhaled sharply. Franklin spoke quietly. "That is me. 7:12 in the morning. Lawfully ticketed. Removed from boarding." The chairwoman's eyes hardened. "That should not happen." Franklin nodded. "It happens every day. Yesterday it happened to the wrong system." A murmur passed through the room. Discomfort. Recognition. Another board member tried to reframe. "We've already taken steps, suspensions, reviews." Franklin leaned forward slightly. "Suspensions don't change patterns. Reviews don't change incentives." A woman near the window spoke. Then what does Franklin looked at her? Structure. He swiped again. A diagram appeared. Not technical. Human. Lines showing escalation paths. Bottlenecks, dead ends. "Your frontline staff have discretion without accountability," Franklin said. "Your escalation paths reward silence over interruption. Your systems assume good faith and punish caution. That combination works until it doesn't." The man who had asked about retaliation frowned. "And your solution?" Franklin didn't smile. "My solution is not new. It's just expensive." He outlined it calmly. Independent oversight on access revocation. Mandatory bias interruption. Training tied to performance, not attendance. A protected escalation channel that cannot be overridden by local authority. Clear consequences for misuse of power, documented and enforced. Thomas added quietly. "We're already drafting." Franklin held up a hand. "Drafting is theater until someone loses something they care about." The chairwoman studied him. "What are you asking in return?" Franklin met her eyes. "Partnership." She raised an eyebrow. You already have a contract. Franklin nodded. For software. This is for trust. A pause. The longest yet. Another board member spoke, cautious. You're asking us to expose ourselves legally. Franklin shrugged. You already are. The difference is whether you control the narrative or let it control you. Thomas watched the room. He could feel the shift. Resistance thinning. The chairwoman leaned back. And if we agree, Franklin's voice softened, then yesterday becomes the worst day this airline ever had. Not the first of many. The room sat with that. A man near the end sighed. I don't like being cornered. Franklin met his gaze. Neither do I. That earned a few reluctant nods. The chairwoman folded her hands. All right. We authorize the audit. Full scope, technical and cultural, external oversight, and we empower you to design the escalation framework with our compliance team. Thomas exhaled relief, breaking through control. Franklin nodded once. Good. But the chairwoman wasn't finished. There's another matter. Franklin waited. Public perception, she said. There are voices calling you reckless, others calling you a hero. Neither is accurate. Franklin agreed. I'm neither. Then why not speak? She asked. Franklin considered it. He thought of the veterans by the window, of Karen holding the line, of Officer Martinez choosing to ask a question. Because the story isn't about me, Franklin said. It's about who gets believed when something feels wrong. She nodded slowly. Then perhaps you should say that. Franklin didn't answer immediately. Outside the boardroom, reporters paced, cameras ready, hunger sharpened by delay. Franklin stood. I'll speak. Briefly. Thomas stood with him. Are you sure? Franklin met his eyes. Silence would make this about speculation. That helps no one. They walked together. The press room buzzed as Franklin stepped to the podium. Flashes, shouts, questions overlapping. Franklin waited. He didn't raise his hands. He didn't smile. He simply stood until the room remembered how to listen. Yesterday, Franklin said we paused 173 planes. Not because something had gone wrong in the sky, but because something almost did on the ground. Cameras clicked. Safety systems exist to catch what humans miss. Franklin continued, but humans decide when to listen to them. Yesterday, a delay caused by a human decision narrowed the window for response. We were lucky to act in time. A reporter shouted, "Was this because of discrimination?" Franklin met the question head-on. It was because of a system that allowed discretion without accountability. That system affects many people. Yesterday, it affected me. Another voice. Do you regret grounding the fleet? Franklin didn't hesitate. No. I regret that it was necessary. A murmur rippled. He concluded simply. If there's a lesson here, it's this. Safety is not just cool and to machines. It's culture, and culture doesn't change until someone is willing to stop everything and ask why. He stepped away from the podium without waiting for applause. Back in the hallway, Thomas walked beside him in silence for a moment. Then thank you. Franklin nodded. We're not done. Hours later, as Franklin left the building, The city had shifted into afternoon. Traffic, horns, life continuing. He checked his phone. Messages from his team, from Karen, from his father again, all saying versions of the same thing. "We saw you." Franklin paused on the steps and looked up. The sky was busy again. Contrails crossing. Movement restored. He knew the backlash would come. The lawsuits, the op-eds, the quiet attempts to undermine what had been agreed in daylight. But he also knew something else. Yesterday had forced a choice. And this time, the system had been made to listen. Franklin walked on the city, swallowing him back into anonymity, carrying with him the weight of what had been started, and the certainty that it would not be easy to undo. The backlash arrived exactly when Franklin expected it. Not loud at first, not angry, just polite resistance dressed up as concern. Op-eds asking whether one man should hold that much influence. Panel discussions debating the line between leadership and overreach. Anonymous sources whispering that the grounding had been excessive, that alternatives existed, that cooler heads might have chosen differently. Franklin read none of it directly. His team summarized. Patterns mattered more than outrage. Inside the airline, the audit began its slow, methodical crawl. External investigators with no loyalty to logos or legacies pulled logs, emails, training records, escalation trees. They sat in quiet rooms with fluorescent lights and asked the same questions again and again, not to trap, but to map where truth bent under pressure. The first findings were uncomfortable in ways no press conference could smooth over. Linda Parker's file showed above-average performance reviews. Reliable. Efficient. Complaints marked resolved without detail. Notes written in the careful language of avoidance. No single incident worth discipline. 1,000 small moments no one had stitched together. Ethan Brooks's record looked similar. Strong service scores. A pattern of informal warnings, coaching notes about tone, nothing actionable, everything familiar. Franklin read the summaries late at night, alone in his hotel room, shoes off tie, folded on the desk. The city outside hummed, sirens, laughter, ordinary life. He felt no triumph, only a dull ache where certainty lived. Karen Whitfield called him on the third night. They'd spoken often since the incident, but her voice was different now. Tight, careful. "We've completed the first phase of interviews," she said. And Karen paused. People didn't see themselves as acting wrongly. They saw themselves as maintaining order. Franklin closed his eyes. Order is a powerful excuse. There's more. Karen continued. The escalation channel you flagged, it technically existed, but no one trusted it. Franklin nodded, even though she couldn't see him. Because trust isn't written into policy, it's built through consequences. Karen exhaled. The report will recommend terminations. Franklin didn't answer immediately. He thought of Linda's face at the gate, the mix of fear and righteousness. The moment authority had slipped and left her exposed. For cause, he said, finally. Yes. Franklin opened his eyes. Then do it cleanly. No leaks, no scapegoating. Say what happened. Say why. Say what will change. Karen hesitated. The union will survive, Franklin said. So will the airline. After the call, Franklin sat in silence longer than he meant to. The room felt small, temporary, like everything did lately. The next morning, Thomas Reynolds joined him for breakfast. Neither touched the food. "They're pushing back hard," Thomas said. "Internally. People are afraid." Franklin stirred his coffee slowly. "Fear isn't the enemy. Denial is." Thomas watched him. "You knew this would happen." Franklin nodded. "Change always feels like punishment to the comfortable." Thomas leaned back. "The board wants to know how far this goes." Franklin looked up. "As far as it needs to." Thomas grimaced. "That answer scares them." Franklin met his eyes. "It should." By the end of the week, the first decisions were announced. Linda Parker was terminated for cause following an independent investigation. The statement was short, specific, unembellished. Ethan Brooks followed 2 days later. Administrative language, clear reasoning, no moralizing. The reaction was immediate. Support poured in quietly. Emails from flight attendants who had swallowed similar moments. From gate agents who had wanted to speak up and hadn't known how. From passengers who recognized themselves in the story without needing it, spelled out. Criticism came louder. Talk radio, comment sections. The word witch hunt appeared more than once. Franklin ignored it all. What he didn't ignore was the letter slipped under his hotel door late one night. No return address. Thick paper. Careful handwriting. It was from Linda. She didn't apologize. She didn't accuse. She wrote about her years on the job, about order, about how quickly chaos spread if you let it, about how no one ever told her when she crossed a line, only that she was efficient. She wrote that she didn't see Franklin that morning. Not really. She saw a disruption. The last line stopped him. "I don't know if I would have listened if someone had stopped me sooner, but I know I didn't listen when you asked." Franklin folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. He didn't feel vindicated. He felt tired. The audit's second phase dug deeper. Decision trees, incentives, who got promoted and why. Patterns emerged that were harder to headline but more dangerous to ignore. Silence rewarded. Speed praised. Hesitation penalized. Franklin sat through presentation after presentation, his face impassive, his notes sparse. He asked questions others avoided. What happens if this fails? Who pays for the delay? Who benefits if no one speaks? Some executives shifted in their seats. Some nodded, a few looked away. One afternoon, a young manager stayed behind after a session. Early 30s. Nervous. "Sir, he said I wanted to say I used the escalation channel once. 2 years ago, nothing happened. After that I stopped." Franklin studied him. "What did it cost you?" The man hesitated. "My confidence." Franklin nodded. "That's too expensive." The manager left lighter than he had arrived. Outside, the airline regulators took notice, not adversarial. Curious. The FAA requested briefings. Other carriers asked questions quietly off the record. Consultants called sensing opportunity. Franklin declined most of them. This isn't a product, he told his team. It's a responsibility. At home, his father watched the coverage with a practiced eye. He called one evening, voice steady. "You're making enemies," his father said. Franklin smiled faintly. "I already had them." His father chuckled. Just make sure you're making the right ones. That night, Franklin stood on his balcony and looked out over the city lights. He thought about the moment at the gate, the cuffs, the sound, how close the story had come to being smaller, personal, forgettable. Instead, it had cracked something open. The next morning, the board convened again. This time, the tone was different, less defensive, more deliberate. The chairwoman spoke plainly. We're approving the full implementation, oversight, training, consequence framework, all of it. Franklin nodded. And ownership. She met his eyes. We'll take it. That mattered more than the vote. As the meeting ended, Thomas walked beside him. You've changed this place, Franklin corrected him. It's changing itself. I just made it uncomfortable enough to start. Later that day, as Franklin prepared to leave the city, he passed through the terminal quietly. No cameras, no announcements, just movement. At gate D18, a new agent stood. Younger, nervous. She scanned a boarding pass carefully, then smiled relief plain. Thank you for your patience, sir. Franklin nodded and walked on. The system was not fixed. Not yet. It would take time, it would resist, it would backslide if allowed. But it had been interrupted, and sometimes Franklin knew interruption was the first act of justice. 6 months later, the airport felt quieter without being softer. Franklin noticed it the moment he stepped through the doors. The noise was still there, rolling suitcases announcements. The low impatience of travel. But something underneath had shifted. Movements were more deliberate. Voices more measured. Eyes lifted more often when something didn't quite fit. Gate D18 no longer looked the same. The podium had been replaced. The layout widened, less confrontational. Screens clearer. A small sign at eye level read, Escalation available. Ask without penalty. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't glow. But it mattered. Franklin stood back and watched for a moment unseen. A man in a worn jacket approached the counter, hesitated, then spoke. The agent listened. She checked the system twice. She didn't rush. She didn't assume. She called a supervisor without embarrassment. The line waited. No one complained. That alone told Franklin more than any report. He moved on, passing security, feeling none of the old tension coil in his chest. Not relief, awareness. The kind that never really leaves once you've learned what systems can do when they turn on you. On the tarmac, planes moved with their usual choreography. Takeoffs clean, landings smooth. 173 aircraft had returned to the sky long ago, but their return had been different this time. Slower, verified, earned. Inside the airline, the changes were no longer theoretical. The audit had reshaped promotion paths. Escalation metrics were now tracked as closely as on-time performance. A delay explained was no longer punished more than a mistake hidden. People were learning not perfectly but visibly that silence carried cost. Franklin sat in a meeting room later that morning, listening more than speaking. Thomas Reynolds talked less now. When he did, he chose his words carefully. The board no longer treated culture as an appendix to safety. It sat at the center. We had our first voluntary escalation yesterday, Thomas said. Gate agent flagged a supervisor's call. 10 minutes of delay, no incident. Franklin nodded. That's progress. Karen Whitfield caught his eye from across the table and smiled faintly. Tired, determined. Still here. After the meeting, Franklin walked the concourse alone. No one stopped him. No one recognized him. That was fine. The work had never been about being seen. He paused near the windows where the veterans had sat that night. Different people now. Different worries. The same sky. Franklin thought of the letter still folded in his desk drawer. Of Linda's words. Of Ethan's silence. Of the young manager who had lost his confidence and found it again. Of Officer Martinez, who still sent updates now and then, small notes about asking one more question than before. Power, Franklin had learned, was not the ability to stop the sky. It was the ability to decide when it should move. He boarded his flight without incident. The boarding pass scanned green on the first try. The agent met his eyes, nodded, and wished him a good trip. Nothing more. Nothing less. In the cabin, a flight attendant took his jacket with practiced ease. Her movements were calm, professional, not overly warm, not distant, just right. "We have your preference on file, sir," she said quietly. "Still water, room temperature." Franklin nodded. "Thank you." As the plane pushed back, he felt no surge of triumph, only a steady sense of alignment. This was how systems were supposed to work. Not perfectly, responsibly. At cruising altitude, he looked out over the cloud line, sunlight stretching endless and indifferent. Somewhere below, millions of people trusted that what held them in the air was more than metal and code, that it was judgment, care, the willingness to pause when something felt wrong. Franklin closed his eyes for a moment and let the hum of the engines settle into him. This story was never about grounding planes. It was about grounding assumptions. About what happens when someone refuses to accept that efficiency matters more than dignity, that order matters more than truth, that silence is safer than interruption. The sky had been stopped once, briefly, on purpose, so it could move forward without carrying the same mistakes with it. If this story stayed with you, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories about power, accountability, and quiet justice. And if you've ever seen a system change because someone chose to interrupt it, share your thoughts in the comments with 3 simple words. Stand your ground.